I remember crying when I first tried to apply for jobs after prison. The application forms were such a huge barrier. That is a direct quote from one of our members of our Conversations on Co-Production group when we're having a conversation about HR policy and lived experience. Welcome to our Conversations on Co-Production. My name is David Ford from ExpertLink. So let's get straight into this. Let's talk about HR and that lived experience and the conversations that we have. In fact, the two conversations that we've had and the outputs from it, the findings from it. So there are 5 key bits that we want to talk about, I think. And the first one is around the abstinence. So it appears to us that abstinence is quite arbitrary. So you go to some organisations and they'll say you've got to have been clean for a year, or others are 2. We've heard of organisations that they need you to be 5 years clean before you can become involved in within the organisation in any sort of formal capacity. That's as a peer mentor, a volunteer, employed, or whatever it is. 5 years clean, and yet recovery is a really individual experience, and people get different or hit different milestones at different times and different parts of their journeys. And so that whole thing about abstinence means could mean a different thing for different people at any time on their recovery journey. So that's the important thing to note. The other thing was around the abstinence is that we seem to be taking this risk-based approach where it's all about the risk, and actually we need to shift to a sort of a trust and strength-based approach when we start thinking about taking people on who've gone through a recovery process. And actually there's a point about this in recovery. When you have whatever you're recovering from, whether it's drug and alcohol, whether it's a physical impairment that you've got, or mental health, or whatever it is, if you have something to focus on, if you have some purpose, that absolutely supports and helps you to maintain your recovery in the long term. Absolutely. So that's an important thing there. And also when we were talking about the abstinence, we were talking about this parity within HR, i.e. Does the abstinence rule count for everybody within the organisation, or is it just the lived experience? And there's a thought for you, isn't it? Perhaps instead of length of time for abstinence, there needs to be what's in place for all staff when people need support, and not just those with lived experience. So our second point that we came on to was around DBSs. Okay, for those of you who don't know what DBS is, those are the police checks that they run on you to see if if you can see whatever's in your past, and then make decisions on whether you can work within an organisation or take up a role within an organisation. But our findings were that really it's actually a really blunt instrument and doesn't have any context. One of the stories came out that, if little Johnny, when Johnny's little, gets caught with his mates setting fire to the bonfire on the common or the local field and stuff, and the police and fire brigade get caught and all that sort of jazz, and it goes on record and stuff, and it says on there fire or arson, and then a few years later he's turned around, because he's pretty active and he's got all that energy and stuff, and he's turned that into some good by wanting to come and work within an organisation in some sort of capacity, but that goes against him because he's got a strike on his DBS. The context there is, it's crazy. So actually, it is just a blunt instrument without any context. And one of the other things around DBS is that I think that we need to recognise is that DBSs only deal with those that got caught. Now, there's a thought for you. I could say a whole bunch of stuff on that, but I wouldn't want to incriminate myself, so I won't. But the point being here is that actually it is only about those that got caught, and so many people get into so many things, don't they? So one of the questions that we might be asking HR is, does your organisation know what a DBS is for and what it is? And do they know the differences between spent and unspent, you know? And one of the key things is, and again, I'll go back to that very first quote, that guy coming out of prison wants to turn his life around, wants to do some good, wants to get some structure, if you like, in doing that good. So wants to join an organisation in some sort of capacity. And then he finds that the DBSs are quite off-putting. And actually, I'm telling you now, they can be quite traumatising. I know I've done DBSs, and when I first applied for my DBSs, it was like, my God, what's going to come out of my past? You know, it's really quite a worrying thing and really off-putting for people. And then if the people don't apply, what a waste of that talent and all that wisdom, those gifts that people could bring and strengths that they could bring to that organisation or your organisation. So the third thing we talked about were the processes. There were too many processes in place when recruiting people with lived experiences. Absolutely, lots and lots of processes. There are also examples of inappropriate questions being asked at an interview when they realised the interviewee had lived experience. But they wouldn't have asked those questions usually. So should you be asking people with lived experience? Really? The fourth thing we talked about was about how people with lived experience are treated once they get into that role. You know, recognising that volunteering can be good, but also sometimes it's exploitative. You know, volunteering for long hours or volunteering on top of paid hours. You shouldn't have to prove yourself through volunteering. Yes, there's a route. I get that, and people can volunteer. I know I've done a lot of volunteering. I've done a lot of volunteering in the past, and I do know that it's a route. But you shouldn't be there for you to prove yourself. That's the point here. The other thing around how people are treated with lived experience, paid positions targeted at for lived experience are often lower paid than other positions. This could be positive to create in the way that it creates opportunities for people who need to, who want to get involved in stuff, but also it can be quite discriminatory, can't it? You know, there was a quote within that conversation where my 10 years of lived experience is just as valid as a PhD or a degree. You know, and actually it probably is, and so surely just because people haven't been through that academic route to bring in their wisdom to contribute to the organisation, but perhaps they've gone through that lived experience route to bring in their wisdom, surely they're the same sort of thing. You know, everyone's bringing in their wisdom. And people should be treated again as equally as they can be. And the other thing that came out when we were talking about the way that lived experience are treated, attitudes to lived experience can be different to other staff, when in fact all staff should be treated the same. You know, it's ironic, isn't it? I'm talking from our conversations on co-production. I live in the world of the charitable voluntary sector, in a world where we talk about equality, we talk about fairness, we talk about valuing that lived experience, you know. But actually, when it comes down to it, through a lot of the policies that we have at HR, that isn't true. What we're saying and what policies dictate that we do aren't congruent. They're not syncing, you know. The other thing went on when we were talking about treating people with lived experience, or how we treat people with lived experience in those roles, is that that the employment of the role shouldn't be re-traumatizing people. We need to recognise, absolutely not re-traumatising people, but we should be recognising that people, when they come into that role, they're there to enrich the organisation, not to be re-traumatised. Absolutely. And one of the things that I found quite sad. So listen, I suffer from mental illness quite badly. I manage it myself. I don't take any medication. I try and work through it. But if you've had mental health difficulties, what became apparent that it can be difficult in the workplace. You're questioned more about your ability to do the job, and this can make it hard for people to be open about their history or their current support needs. We talk about treating people equally. We talk about, diversity and equality, and we talk about valuing lived experience. And yet, often what we do is like, you can't bring in your mental health, and that is actually quite sad. I'm going on about this quite a bit because it really does affect me, and it's quite sad when we think about time for change, on all of the stuff that we've done around mental illness and sort of destigmatizing it, if you like. Okay, let's have a rant on that one. Let's move on. Let's move on to some suggestions, some positive stuff, because what we were clear about is, we can is about being solution focused and looking at some of the solutions that we can come up with to help HR departments. So the first one is that HR systems has to have a bit of flex in it. It needs to be person to person rather than a set of rules for all. I know, David, can we all do that? Well, we can do it because it's about relationships, it's about conversations, it's about understanding people, and HR understanding the people who they're there to look after effectively, the employees of the organisation. Any policies need to be proportionate to the role and relevant. I mean, you would think that would make common sense anyway, but that might start to get rid of some of the stuff where we have these arbitrary rules and things that we just lump down and everyone's got to fit in it. And actually, maybe that lived experience doesn't fit in with that. So the policies need to be proportionate and to the role and relevant to the role. It would be great if we did trauma-informed in recruitment and took a strength-based approach on it. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Again, this is the sector talks about it all the time. Yeah, we're trauma-informed. Yes, psychologically informed environments. And yet when it comes to recruitment, it sounded to us as if, or it appeared to us, that there wasn't trauma-informed recruitment. And the recruitment's that bit where we start to build cultures, when that first interaction with somebody with the organisation, when we start to build those cultures, so co-produced recruitment processes that include the interviews and stuff. When people step into that, obviously that's when they're starting to get into that culture of co-production and stuff. We should be doing that with trauma-informed stuff as well, as right from the off with that recruitment. Absolutely, especially if we know somebody has lived experience. You need good employee support services for everybody, not just lived experience who can have a relapse or suffer with mental illness. As I said, I shared my own story, and also not everybody will be sharing their lived experience. A lot of people won't share the same as I do. Most people don't. A lot of people don't want to be sick. Again, that's a bit of that stigma stuff going on there. So there needs to be support services for everybody, equally, regardless of who they are, or access to the support services. This is the big one for me. All policies and procedures should be accessible, honest, and transparent. Let me repeat that. All policies and procedures should be accessible, honest, and transparent. So those are our main suggestions for you. There was one other big thing that came out of our conversation that I want to share, and it's the question about how do we influence human resources within our organisations. Well, here's a start. You can start by sharing this. Email a link to this to your HR team. That's a start. That's what we can do. Let's start, by doing that, start those conversations, and we can start to think about how we treat people differently. If we go a little bit up meta a bit here, how we treat people differently, because we're all the same. We're all incredible human beings and need to be treated as incredible human beings, So thank you very much for watching this. If you've got all the way to the end, don't forget to hit that like button, and please subscribe. It helps the algorithms. It helps, you know, share all this. If you get to the end and press the like button, YouTube will like that, and it'll help us in our conversations. I think that's all for me. I love you all. Take care and see you next time.
Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. No matter what.